Access 2007, Designing Forms. In this nugget, we are going to take advantage of that form wizard that exists within Microsoft Access. It holds our hand and it says, hey, you want to create a form? Fantastic. What is going to be the source of your data, a table or a query? And what do you want it to look like? What format do you want? What style do you want? And then it gives us a very nicely finished form. But of course, we're talking Microsoft here. We can make changes. We can adjust the fields, add fields, delete fields. We can add more controls like radio buttons or checkboxes or even buttons that will print reports for us if we wanted. We can also adjust the format. And we have many different tools in Access that are going to really give us a well-rounded, easy-to-use, functional form for our users. Well, let's jump in to Microsoft Access. I have it on my taskbar. I have the Zoo database open, and we're looking at the vendors table. These are all the vendors we use to order the food for our hungry animals. We are going to use the Form Wizard first of all. How do we do this? It's on the Create ribbon. Create. I don't see it right here, but look at this. More forms, Form Wizard. As with any functional wizard, what do we want to be the source of the data for our forms? We have choices between tables and queries that exist within our Access file. I'll choose the vendors table, but I want to make a point here. If you are going to base your form off of a query, you may have a query that's based off of multiple tables, so be careful that you have enough forms created that are going to populate all the various fields in all of these various tables, because once you start working with putting together tables into queries and forms that are only going to fill in fields of half a table, you just need to make sure that all that data in that table will end up being populated. And if you find that it just doesn't make sense to have a form that fills in specific data, maybe that's data you don't need to collect anyway. The bigger point here is having good design and thinking through what you need in the first place is really going to help you as you progress through all of the various objects in Access. So my source is table vendors. I'd like to add all of these fields, but using a combination of these buttons, I could just choose exactly the fields that I'd like. Next, well, do I want to see columnar, one record at a time in my form, tabular, which will show as many as will fit on the screen. Datasheet really does look like a table datasheet or an Excel spreadsheet. Justified will be flush on the left and the right. I'm going to go with the default, which is columnar. Now we get to select a style. There are tons of different style templates, if you will. This is called an auto format, and at a later time I can change the entire auto format, or singly I can change the font or the color or the depth of the fields. We have tons and tons of choices, as I'm sure you guessed. What do I want to call my form? Well, vendors make sense because it's a form to input the vendors that we have for our zoo. Here's the potential problem. I have a table called vendors. It's okay if I'm in the GUI interface because I can tell a difference. Oh, I'm in a table. Oh, I'm in a form. But what if I'm creating VB code and I want to make sure that I'm talking about the right object? It's going to be very hard to differentiate. One standard is that you use a naming convention like FRM for form in front of the name. That would be TBL for table, RPT for report, BTN for a button that exists on a form or a report. The key is being standard, and this is not a Microsoft naming convention. It's not a Microsoft standard. It's out there in the database world, and it comes from someone named Reddick, R-E-D-D-I-C-K. See, you probably won't see that if you're taking the exam, but the idea is to be consistent and not to confuse your DBAs, your users, not to confuse yourself as time progresses. I have not taken up this standard, so I shouldn't start it now, but I will just because we're learning. When I click Finish, it's going to open into Form View, but I could bump it right into Design View. Here's my form. It's not too hard to understand. I could make it better, but not bad for really just taking a few moments and clicking a few buttons. Here is the label. It's based off of the name of my form. We're in form view, so I could be updating and changing data. We have 8 records in this form. If I move over to layout view, now I can update the labels, but I can't change the data, but I can see the data, which is what sets layout view apart from design view. I do not want to confuse my users by having FRM vendors, so I will press delete on my keyboard, and now my label makes sense. However, the name of my form has not changed. I'm in layout view, I'm on the format tab, and here I have a couple different choices. I could go back into auto format. How awesome is that for a layout? I know, it's boring, but at least it's not something that will interfere with my users. Here I am. I could also select and change just the font size, and I could make some tweaks to the color of the font or the background. Let's go into design view. Here we see more detailed. I am in the form header. So if you're familiar with Office products like Word and Excel, you might know that a header is something that's going to print out on every page or be visible on every page. The same goes here. This form header will be visible at the beginning of my form. Well, that doesn't really make that much of a difference with a form, because a form is usually going to be one dialog box that you see on your screen that you don't really have to probably scroll too much for, because you could just make another pop-up form if your form gets too large. Now, a lot of these controls that you see here in the forms are the exact same as they are on the report. So of course it's going to make more sense when we're talking about multi-page reports. You have report headers and page headers there as well. I just want to point out that you do have a form header, and you could resize it if you wanted to. I could resize my text box here, move things around, and resize my form header. I also have a form footer, which will appear at the very bottom of the form. There's no size to it, but I could click and drag and add some size there if I wanted to. So we have form headers, form footers, and then this is referred to as the detail area, because this is where all of my controls are. Let's go ahead and design a form from scratch now. I'm going to close my FRM vendors. Do you want to save changes? I sure do. That was a masterpiece. Now let's create another form from scratch. Again, it's not necessary that I have this table open. Just to prove it, I'll close it. We've got nothing open except for our main access file. I'd like to create a blank form. So back to the Create ribbon. I have a few choices here. Blank form, which will just be empty in Form View. Form Design, which will be empty in Form Design View, which is really a lot more functional. Or I could go back to Form Wizard, or use a modal dialog. I'm not going to do a modal dialog, but we will get into that with a more advanced form section. A modal dialog box is one that you have to address. It's focused on your screen and you can't do anything until you address that. Similar to if you've ever been in Microsoft Word and you choose the open button, you can't do anything else in Word until you open up a file. That's a modal dialog box. Form design. We have Form 1 as our tab, so it hasn't been saved, and we're looking at the detail section. Let's start with adding some fields. We have the Add Existing Fields button, and this is new and robust to Access 2007. It used to be a lot more difficult to use, and it used to not show all of the different tables and the associated fields. So the first thing we do is we think, which table are we going to use here? I'm going to go ahead and use the memberships table. If I wanted to, that's so neat. I could go in and actually edit the table from here, because I might realize, goodness gracious, I sure did something wrong when I designed that table first off. So I want to use this. I can't click and drag the whole table out. I can click and drag one field, and where I drop it, you'll get used to this, but it kind of overlaps things if you drop them too far over to the left. Now from here I could double click items, and because I've chosen that this is the table that I'm working with, I can press Shift on my keyboard and select more than one field at the same time. I could scroll down and press Shift, and now it selects everything in between. So Shift on your keyboard allows you to make multiple selections. I would recommend that because now I can click all of them at once and drag them out here and drag them out here and place them where it makes sense. I'm through with my field list, so I'll close this, but of course I can always come back to it. I have a little bit of a mess, don't I? These are pretty clear and clean. I can click and drag and they all work together because notice they're all selected. If I click outside and I deselect them on accident, I can use my Shift button while I click to select more than one, or I can draw a marquee by clicking and dragging around all of them, and then when I release, they're all selected. From here also I can resize items. I'm going to hit my undo button because that's not really clear. I just wanted to show you that. Now let's line these guys up. If I select this label, I can click and drag and drop them a little bit closer in here. I can click and drag, but I've run into some trouble here. It's overlapping. Notice when I click here, it moves the label and the field. However, if I click here, and you got to do it just right, it'll move just the label. It's funny. You got to be very specific about where you're clicking and dragging. We used to, in older versions of Access, our pointer would change into a little hand with a little finger. And when you saw the little pointer finger up, you knew that you were moving just one object. Access tries to move the entire field and label together because that is better formatting. But if you need to, you can move just the label. You could even delete the label because I might think, well, membership ID, delete, that makes sense. Whoops, I'm going to hit undo to bring it back because I had to have that just selected, delete. Now I've deleted that label. I haven't hurt my underlying data because labels are just descriptions of text. So we have some kind of a mess here, and I'll make it even more of a mess. Let's move these guys around a little bit. I have some arrange tools. If you accidentally just move stuff into crazy locations, you can always then select items, go to your Arrange tab, and from here I can make sure that everything is aligned to the left. I could make sure that I just select these items and then align them to the left, which makes a little bit more sense there. I could just select my labels and align them to the left or align them to the right. By saying aligning to the left or the right, I'm saying of my selection, the top item, align everything flush to the right side of it or flush to the left side of it. Top and bottom would be something that would make sense if you're trying to line stuff up in a horizontal fashion, but we're working vertical here. All right, still not necessarily perfect, so let's select these two and hit the top, and so now they're flush at the top, and the down arrow on my keyboard allows me just to nudge items little by little. This will take some work for you to feel comfortable with it. It's one of those things that you can explore. I'm going to go back to home so I can go back into form view so you can see what it looks like actually with the data. It looks like we need to make this larger. It looks like we might want to align this to the left so it's clear, even though numbers by default try to align to the right. I can change the formatting. I have lots of choices here, and if you know the commands in Word, Excel, PowerPoint for formatting, they work just the same here. You have Format Painter, you have cut, copy, paste, you have bold, underline, italic. So I'm not going to take you into those items, though I am going to show you some other formats that you can do. Let's go back into Design View. Notice I have all these extra views now too, but I'm going to go into Design View. Let's add a logo and a label, and we're going to also add some radio buttons. If we'd like to add a logo and a label, I'd like to do that on the header. So I chose the Arrange button, and from here, Show Hide Form Header and Form Footer. I can resize this, and I'm going to add a label. So I can go back to Design, and this is the label button here. And I have two choices. I can just simply click, or I could have clicked and dragged to make it the size that I'd like it to be. From here, I'll type in vendors, and I will either select the text like that, or here in Access you can select the entire field, the entire label, and make the changes. So font Calibri is fine with me. I'm going to increase the size to 22 because I want to show you what happens. I can't see the text, so I could resize the label, or I can use something called auto size. Back on Arrange, I can go to the auto size button and it automatically makes that label the size that my text is, so it will accommodate my text. I'd like to add a logo. Back to the Design tab, I have my logo button here. It's telling me, well, okay, great. Where on your hard drive or on the network is your logo? And it doesn't have to be a logo. It's just inputting a graphics file, like a JPEG or a bitmap or some other graphics format. From here, I can resize this. If I don't like the size, I can go back to undo. Now, let's also add some radio buttons. You might have noticed the membership level here. Okay, so a user can select that if they want, but I'd like to have radio buttons. So back into Design View, and I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard and move that out of there. There is this item right here which allows me to add what's called an option group. I want it to be that large, and it gives me a wizard. What labels do I want? You might remember it was silver, gold, I hit tab on my keyboard, gold, tab, platinum. Next, what do I want the default choice to be when a user is entering data? What do I want the default to be? No, I don't want a default. I don't want to influence what they're going to select. It will add the values 1, 2, and 3 back into the table instead of silver, gold, and platinum. Next, store the value in the membership ID field, or do I want to save the value for later use? You would have to have some code behind that. Membership ID makes sense. Ooh, actually back. It was membership level is where we want to store that. Next, do I want it to be option buttons, check boxes, or toggle buttons? Option buttons are fine with me. Do I want it to be etched, flat, raised, shadowed, or sunken? Hey, shadowed. Next, what do I want to call this option group? Membership, member level, option group, or buttons, or whatever it is that would make sense in your naming convention. I'll choose finish, and now here we see it. That is not a good name, is it? So we'll change that to membership level. This is a label that we could move if we grab it in the right spot, or we could delete it altogether. And I just realized our label should be called members. Memberships. This isn't the vendors table anymore. Let's take a look at Inform View. There, memberships. Our membership level, we can make changes. Evidently, our table underneath this is not a field that we had added a lot of information into. That is how you create an option group. Back into Design View, we can also add some nice, pleasing components, like we could draw a rectangle around the entire thing, maybe to set this apart. When we select that, we could change the color if we wanted to. If I'd like to give this header a nice color, here I go back to Home, and it's the paint bucket. Maybe I want it to be a nice peach color. I can also add a nice effect to these fields. I'm just going to press Shift and select a couple of them here at a time because I want to make sure that I'm selecting the field there. And I have my Special Effects tab. I can make these all shadowed as well. Now let's go back into Form View and take a look. So I'm adding a little bit of a pleasing look to Form View. Now, I want to make sure you know that in Layout View, you also have the opportunity to adjust the lines and the look. You can add a logo, and under Font, you can also change the background color, like we used the paint bucket to change this. The tools are in different places depending on if you're in Layout View or Design View. So it takes some getting into the program to really familiarize yourself with the location of information. We'll go back into Design View, and let's add now a date and time. Here we have the date and time button. We have some options here. I'll go with the default, and this is showing me the field. The code behind it is the current date and the current time. If I go into form view, I see that current information. If I go into layout view, I also see the current information. So hopefully this is helpful in showing you design view really is the structure behind everything. Layout view is a little bit lighter than design view, but it's still functional in making your form look good and work with your table. And then really form view is just for adding data, and this is the final product that your end user will see. Let's go back into design view, and I want to finish up by telling you these are all the controls. This used to be called your toolbox in older versions of Access. These controls have not changed in years upon years and Access versions upon versions. I've pointed out the main new items that do exist in Access 2007. And as we progress through the rest of these nuggets, we are going to work some more with the controls that work in your forms. We can review what it is that we talked about in this nugget. We took advantage of that form wizard that's there to hold our hand and prompt us along. We added fields to our own form from scratch by using design view. We took a look at the basic controls that exist in design view mainly, but there are some items within layout view, but layout view is really more for the formats, and you have total flexibility and control over how your forms are going to perform. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.